The slap echoed like thunder across the courtyard. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Every wolf, every warrior, every soul who'd ever learned to bow before power stood frozen, their eyes wide with the kind of terror that comes not from what might happen, but from what absolutely will. Mira didn't run. She should have. Gods knew her legs were screaming at her to move, to bolt, to disappear into the forest and never look back. But her feet stayed planted in the dirt, her body a shield between the trembling wolf pup behind her and the most dangerous predator in 5 territories. Alpha King Cale Thornridge, the man she'd just struck across the face. Her hand still stung from the contact, her palm burning where it had connected with his jaw. She could feel the phantom heat of his skin, the hard line of bone beneath, and something else, something that made her wolf whimper deep inside her chest. Power. Ancient and absolute. The kind that could crush her without a second thought. He stood there, towering over her like a storm-given flesh. 6.5 feet of brutal strength wrapped in dark leather and darker intent. His jaw was sharp enough to cut, his eyes the color of molten gold in shadow, and right now those eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her knees want to buckle. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and iron. Storm clouds gathered overhead as if the sky itself knew something terrible was about to unfold. Myra's hair whipped across her face, strands sticking to the cold sweat on her skin. She was shaking. She couldn't stop shaking. Behind her, little Ash, the runt pup she'd been nursing back to health for weeks, let out a pitiful whine. That sound, that tiny broken sound, was what had started all of this. When the Alpha King had approached during his inspection, his overwhelming presence had sent the pup into a panic. Ash had cowered, trembling so violently Mira thought his little heart might give out. And she'd acted without thinking. Stepped forward, raised her hand, connected with the face of the most feared wolf in the realm. The Clearwater pack stood in a circle around them, a gallery of witnesses to her execution. She could feel their stares like brands on her skin. Some looked horrified, others eager. Pack Beta Garrett's mouth hung open in shock. The pack's healer, Old Maven, had gone pale as death. Even Alpha Silas, her own pack leader, a man who'd never shown her a moment of kindness, looked like he might faint. No one moved to defend her. No one would dare. Mira was nothing. A low-ranked Omega with no family, no protector, no value beyond the dirty work she did in the kennels. She cleaned up waste and scrubbed floors and kept her head down because that's what you did when you were born at the bottom. When your mother died bringing you into the world and your father couldn't bear to look at you. When the pack whispered that you were cursed, defective, wrong somehow in ways they couldn't name but could always sense. The only thing she'd ever protected was Ash. The runt. The reject. The pup the pack had left to die because he was too small, too weak, not worth the resources. She'd found him 3 weeks ago, abandoned in the old storage shed, ribs showing through matted fur, eyes barely open. Something in her had broken and mended all at once when she'd picked him up. This tiny creature needed her. For the first time in her 22 years of existence, someone needed her. So she'd hidden him. Fed him scraps from her own meager portions, kept him warm with her own body heat on cold nights, watched him slowly, painfully begin to thrive. And now she was going to die for him. Cale Thornridge still hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. The mark of her hand was visible on his cheek, a red handprint standing out against bronze skin. His expression was unreadable, carved from stone, but something flickered in those golden eyes. Something that made her stomach drop. The silence stretched like a blade against her throat. Someone in the crowd gasped. Another whimpered. Mira could hear her own heartbeat, wild and erratic, drumming against her ribs. She could smell her own fear, sharp and acrid. Could feel the weight of her death settling over her shoulders like a cloak. This was it. This was how she'd go. Not quietly fading into obscurity like she'd always imagined, but spectacularly. Publicly. A cautionary tale for anyone who forgot their place. At least Ash would be safe. The thought came unbidden, desperately hopeful. Maybe someone would take pity on the pup once she was gone. Maybe Maven would. Kale's lips curved. It wasn't a smile. Not quite. It was something sharper. More dangerous. The kind of expression a wolf makes before it lunges for the throat. What, he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself, is your name. Myra's breath caught. Of all the things she'd expected, rage, violence, immediate execution, a question hadn't been one of them. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her throat had gone dry as bone. I asked you a question, little wolf. His head tilted slightly, studying her the way a predator studies prey. Your name? Am Mira. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Mira Ashford. Mira. He repeated it slowly, tasting each syllable. Then his gaze dropped to the pup cowering behind her legs. And the runt. Ash. She shifted slightly, instinctively keeping herself between them. His name is Ash. Something passed across Kale's face, too quick to read, gone before she could process it. He took a step forward. Myra's body locked up, every muscle screaming danger, but she didn't move back. Couldn't. If she moved, she'd expose Ash, and that was unthinkable. The Alpha King stopped inches from her. This close, she could see the flecks of amber in his golden eyes, could smell cedar and smoke, and something wild that made her wolf stir with confusion. This close, she could see he wasn't just angry. He was intrigued. Do you know what happens, Kale said softly, dangerously, to wolves who strike their king? Mira swallowed hard. Death. Usually. His eyes never left hers. Painful. Public. Meant to serve as a reminder that some lines should never be crossed. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. She wouldn't beg, wouldn't cry. If she was going to die, she'd do it with whatever shred of dignity she had left. But Kale Thornridge didn't move to kill her. Instead, he did something that stopped her heart completely. He smiled. Not the sharp, predatory expression from before. A real smile. Small. Almost imperceptible. But there. And worse, far worse, there was approval in those golden eyes. Recognition. Like he'd been searching for something and had just found it in the last place he'd expected. Tell me, Mira Ashford, he said, his voice dropping to a tone that somehow felt intimate despite the 100 wolves watching. Why did you do it? The honest answer rose to her lips before she could stop it. He was scared. Ash was scared. You were, she faltered, but his raised eyebrow pushed her forward. You were too much. Too powerful. He's just a baby. He didn't understand. I couldn't let him. You struck a king to protect a runt that isn't even yours. It wasn't a question. He said it like he was working through a puzzle, piecing together something that fascinated him. Yes. What else could she say? Kale stared at her for a long moment. The courtyard had gone so quiet she could hear the wind moving through the trees beyond the pack house. Could hear someone's shaky breathing. Could hear her own pulse roaring in her ears. Then the Alpha King turned to face the assembled pack. And when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. I claim her. The world tilted sideways. Mira heard the words, but couldn't process them. Couldn't make sense of them. Claim. He'd said claim. But that couldn't mean. By right of transgression and by law of hierarchy, Kale continued, his tone formal now, ringing with power, Mira Ashford is removed from Clearwater Pack's authority. She is mine. Anyone who challenges this answers to me. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Alpha Silas looked like he might collapse. Beta Garrett's face had gone purple. The pack that had ignored her, dismissed her, treated her like dirt for her entire life now stared at her like she'd transformed into something incomprehensible. Myra's legs finally gave out, but before she could hit the ground, an arm caught her. Strong. Steady. Kale had moved faster than her eyes could track, and now he held her upright, his hand burning through the thin fabric of her worn shirt. The pup too, he added, almost as an afterthought. It stays with her. Then he looked down at her, and this time the smile reached his eyes. "Come along, Mira. We have much to discuss." And as he led her away from the only home she'd ever known, cruel as it had been, through a pack that now bowed to her simply because she belonged to him, Mira couldn't decide if she'd been saved or claimed by something far more dangerous than death. Either way, her life as she'd known it was over. And something new, terrifying, and utterly unknown had just begun. The Alpha King's convoy was a sight Mira had only glimpsed from a distance before today. Sleek black vehicles that looked like they could tear through anything in their path. Warriors who moved with the kind of precision that came from decades of training. And an aura of power so thick it made the air heavy. Now she was inside one of those vehicles. Mira sat pressed against the far door of the SUV, Ash curled in her lap, trembling. The pup hadn't stopped shaking since they'd left the Clearwater territory, and honestly, neither had she. Her fingers were buried in his soft gray fur, more for her own comfort than his. Every few seconds, she'd glance at the man sitting across from her, then quickly look away. Cale Thornridge hadn't spoken since they'd gotten in the vehicle. He sat with the kind of stillness that suggested controlled violence, a predator at rest, but never truly relaxed. His eyes were fixed on something outside the tinted window, his expression unreadable. In the confined space, his presence was overwhelming. The scent of him, cedar and smoke, and something wild that made her wolf pace restlessly, filled every breath she took. She didn't understand any of this. Claimed. He'd claimed her. In front of the entire pack. In front of witnesses from 3 other territories who'd come for the inspection. The word had power, binding power, and once spoken by an Alpha King it couldn't be taken back without dishonor. But why? People didn't claim Omegas like her. They tolerated them, used them, forgot about them. They certainly didn't claim them for slapping their face. That should have earned her a swift execution, maybe a public one to make an example. Instead, she was sitting in luxury she'd never imagined, being taken to. Where exactly? You're thinking very loudly. Cale's voice cut through the silence, making her jump. His eyes had shifted to her, golden and penetrating. Ask. Myra's throat worked. Ask what? Whatever question is making you chew your bottom lip raw. He leaned back in his seat, somehow managing to look both relaxed and dangerous. You've been doing it for the past 20 minutes. She released her lip, not even realizing she'd been biting it. Heat crept up her neck. I don't understand why you claimed me. No, he agreed. I don't imagine you do. The silence stretched. Mira waited for him to elaborate, but he just continued watching her with that unnerving intensity. Finally, frustrated and terrified and confused all at once, she pushed forward. I struck you. I disrespected you in front of your people. In front of other alphas. I should be dead. Yes, Cale said simply. You should be. Her stomach dropped. Then why? Tell me about the pup. He nodded toward Ash. How long have you had him? The subject changed through her, but something in his tone made her answer. 3 weeks. Maybe a bit more. I found him in the old storage shed. They'd left him there to die. Because he was weak. Because they thought he was weak, Mira corrected, surprised by the edge in her own voice. She looked down at Ash, who'd finally stopped trembling and was watching Cale with wary curiosity. He's not weak. He's small, yes. Slower to develop. But he's strong. Stubborn. A fighter. You see yourself in him. It wasn't a question. Myra's hands tightened in Ash's fur. I see what he could be. What he deserves a chance to be. Cale made a low sound that might have been approval. Your pack called you defective. Cursed. I heard them whispering while we waited for you to be brought forward. His eyes never left her face. Do you believe them? The question hit like a physical blow. Mira had spent her entire life hearing those words, had them thrown at her in anger and muttered behind her back in disgust. She'd learned to ignore them, to let them slide off without sinking in. But hearing them from him, in that calm, matter-of-fact tone, made something crack in her chest. I believe, she said carefully, that I've never been what they wanted me to be. And what did they want you to be? Invisible. Obedient. Grateful for whatever scraps they threw my way. The words came out bitter, more honest than she'd intended. I was supposed to accept my place and never question why I was given so little when others were given so much. But you questioned it anyway. No. Mira shook her head. I couldn't let him die. Everyone else could walk past that shed, hear him crying, and do nothing. I couldn't. Maybe that makes me defective. Maybe normal wolves can turn off that part of themselves that feels. She stopped, realizing she was saying too much. That feels what? Cale pressed, leaning forward slightly. The movement brought him closer, and Myra's breath caught. Say it. Everything, she whispered. That feels everything too much, too deeply. Compassion for creatures that don't matter. Anger at injustice no one else sees. Grief for a world that's crueler than it needs to be. She met his eyes, and something reckless made her continue. So yes, maybe I am defective. Maybe there's something wrong with me that I can't just accept that some lives matter less than others. The corner of Cale's mouth quirked. Not quite a smile, but close. I've been searching for you for a very long time, Mira Ashford. Her heart stuttered. What? Not you specifically, he clarified, settling back in his seat. But someone like you. Someone who feels too much in a world that feels too little. Someone whose instinct toward compassion is stronger than their instinct toward self-preservation. His eyes held hers. Do you know how rare that is? How precious? Mira couldn't speak. Couldn't process what she was hearing. I rule 5 territories, Cale continued, his voice taking on a weight that suggested this mattered deeply to him. Hundreds of packs. Thousands of wolves. I deal with alphas every day who would sacrifice anyone for power. Warriors who follow orders without question. Wolves who've learned that strength means dominance and weakness deserves death. His jaw tightened. They're effective. Loyal. Powerful. And they're exactly what's destroying us from within. I don't understand, Mira managed. No, but you will. He glanced out the window. We're almost there. Mira followed his gaze and felt her breath catch. Through the trees, she could see it, a compound that made the Clearwater pack house look like a shed. Stone and glass and architectural beauty that seemed to grow from the forest itself. Warriors patrolled the perimeter, their movements synchronized and deadly. In the distance, she could see what looked like a training ground, a medical facility, living quarters that could house hundreds. This was Thornridge Keep, the seat of the Alpha King's power. And she was being brought here as his, what exactly? Prisoner? Property? The claimed? You're afraid. Cale's voice was softer now, almost gentle. I can send it on you. Feel it in the way you've pressed yourself against that door like you might throw yourself out if given the chance. Mira didn't deny it. You're the Alpha King. You could do anything you want to me, and no one would stop you. No one would care. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't terrified. Good, he said, surprising her. Fear can be healthy. It keeps you cautious. Alert. He waited until she met his eyes. But understand this, Mira, I didn't claim you to hurt you. I claimed you because in that courtyard, you showed me something I'd almost given up finding. Courage that had nothing to do with physical strength. Defiance born from love, not hate. The willingness to sacrifice yourself for someone who society deemed worthless. You claimed me because I slapped you for a pup? I claimed you because you didn't think about the consequences. Didn't calculate the risk. You just acted, purely on instinct, to protect something vulnerable. His voice dropped lower, intimate, and intense. In a world of calculated moves and political maneuvering, you were the first genuine thing I've encountered in years. The vehicle came to a stop. Through the window, Mira could see they'd arrived at the main entrance. Wolves in formal attire were already approaching, their faces carefully neutral as they waited. Cale opened his door but paused before stepping out. I'm going to offer you something now, Mira. A choice. You can run. Take the pup, take some money, Disappear into whatever territory will have you. I'll tell my wolves to let you go, and you'll never see me again." Hope and confusion warred in her chest. Or you can come inside. Stay. Let me show you what I saw in that courtyard. Let me prove that your instinct toward compassion isn't a defect, it's exactly what this world needs. He held out his hand. But if you choose to stay, you stay as yourself. Not as my prisoner. Not as someone I own. As someone I want to understand. Someone whose perspective I value. Mira stared at his outstretched hand. Large, scarred, undeniably powerful. The hand of a king. The hand of a man who just appended her entire world with 3 words, "I claim her." She should run. Every survival instinct she had screamed at her to take the offer, take Ash, and disappear. This man was dangerous. His world was dangerous. She didn't belong here, among warriors and power players and wolves who moved with deadly grace. But then she looked down at Ash, who was watching her with those bright, trusting eyes. The pup she'd saved because no one else would. The pup who represented everything she believed in, that worth wasn't determined by strength or rank or what others decided you deserved. And she thought about what Kale had said. Someone who feels too much in a world that feels too little. Maybe she was defective. Maybe there was something wrong with her that she couldn't just turn off her empathy, couldn't just accept cruelty as normal. But if that was true, then maybe, just maybe, being defective was exactly what she needed to be. Mira shifted Ash to one arm and reached out. Her hand looked impossibly small in his, her skin pale against his bronze. But when his fingers closed around hers, warm, steady, solid, something settled in her chest. Not peace, exactly. More like recognition. Like her wolf had been waiting for this moment without her even knowing. "I'll stay," she said quietly. "For now." Kale's smile was small but genuine. "For now is enough." He helped her out of the vehicle, keeping her hand in his as they walked toward the entrance. Wolves bowed as they passed, their eyes sliding to Mira with barely concealed curiosity. She felt exposed, vulnerable, completely out of place in her dirty work clothes and tangled hair. But Kale's hand stayed firm around hers, anchoring her. And when they crossed the threshold into Thornridge Keep, into a world she'd never imagined she'd be part of, Mira realized something terrifying. She didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt like someone who'd just been seen for the first time in her life. And she had no idea if that would save her or destroy her. The room they gave her was bigger than the entire kennel shed she'd called home for the past 3 years. Mira stood in the doorway, Ash still cradled in her arms, and tried to process what she was seeing. A bed, an actual bed with soft linens that looked like they'd never been touched by dirt or blood or the kind of exhaustion that came from scrubbing floors until your hands bled. Windows that overlooked the forest, letting in golden afternoon light. A bathroom with running water and what looked like an actual bathtub. Furniture that wasn't broken or stained or third-hand cast-offs. It was too much. All of it was too much. "The adjoining room has supplies for the pup," a calm voice said behind her. Mira turned to find a woman in her 40s, with silver streaking through dark hair and eyes that held the kind of wisdom that came from seeing too much. Blankets, food, toys. Whatever he needs. "Thank you," Mira managed, her voice hoarse. "I'm sorry I don't." "Vera." The woman's smile was kind. "I manage the residential wing. If you need anything at all, you pull that cord by the bed and I'll come." Her gaze softened as she looked at Ash. "Poor little thing. He's been through it, hasn't he?" Myra's arms tightened protectively around the pup. "He's stronger than he looks." "I can see that. Takes a fighter to survive what he's survived." Vera moved to a cabinet and pulled out fresh towels. "The king said you're to have whatever you require. Clothes, food, medical attention for yourself or the pup. No request is too small." The king. The words sounded surreal. Just hours ago, Mira had been invisible. Now she was standing in a room that probably cost more than her entire pack's monthly resources, being told the Alpha King himself had ordered her comfort. I don't understand why he's doing this, Mira heard herself say. I'm nobody. I'm just someone he claimed. Vera's expression was unreadable. That makes you somebody, whether you feel like it or not. She set the towels on the bed. Dinner is in 2 hours. I'll have something brought up for you and the pup. You look like you could use some rest. Rest. The word felt foreign. Mira couldn't remember the last time she'd rested without one ear listening for danger, without the constant awareness that safety was temporary and could be revoked at any moment. After Vera left, Mira finally set Ash down. The pup immediately began exploring, his nose working overtime as he investigated every corner of the room. She watched him, feeling something tight in her chest begin to ease. At least Ash would be safe here. Whatever happened to her, at least she'd gotten him out of Clearwater. She moved to the window, looking out at the forest beyond. The trees were old here, ancient, their branches reaching toward a sky that was beginning to turn orange and pink with sunset. It was beautiful, peaceful, everything Clearwater had never been. And it made her remember everything she'd tried so hard to forget. She'd been 7 when her mother died. The memory was fragmented, painful flashes that came in dreams and quiet moments. Her mother's face, pale and sweating. The smell of blood and fear. The way the pack healer had shaken her head and left without even trying. And later, much later, the whispered words that followed Mira everywhere. Cursed. The mother died bringing her into the world. That child carries death. Her father had looked at her once after that. Just once. And in his eyes, she'd seen something that no 7-year-old should ever have to witness flame. Grief so profound it had curdled into hate. He'd left the pack 3 days later, unable to bear the sight of the daughter who'd cost him his mate. Mira had been raised by obligation after that. Shuffled between families who took her in because it was expected, not wanted. Fed the bare minimum. Given the worst sleeping spots. Taught early and often that her existence was a burden others bore out of duty, nothing more. She'd learned to make herself small. To speak only when spoken to accept whatever was given and never ask for more. To smile and nod when other children's parents hugged them, even though no one ever hugged her. To pretend it didn't hurt when she was picked last for everything, when her name was said with sighs, when adults talked about her like she wasn't standing right there. Poor thing. Such a burden. Someone should do something about her. But no one ever did. She was just there. A ghost in her own life. When she turned 15, they'd moved her to the kennels. Told her it was where she belonged with the working wolves, the ones who served rather than led. She'd cleaned waste and hauled water and slept on a thin mat in a storage room that smelled like wet dog and mildew. She'd told herself it was fine. That this was her place. That she should be grateful to have any place at all. But inside, something had burned. A tiny flame of rage and grief and desperate longing for something more. Something better. A life where she mattered. Where her feelings counted. Where compassion wasn't weakness and kindness wasn't wasted on someone like her. She'd never told anyone about that flame. Had barely acknowledged it herself. Because what good would it do? She was powerless. Rankless. A cursed omega that no one wanted and everyone tolerated. Until 3 weeks ago, when she'd found Ash. Mira blinked, realizing she'd been staring at the forest without seeing it. Her reflection stared back at her in the window glass, a girl she barely recognized. Tangled brown hair that hadn't seen a proper brush in days. Gray eyes that looked too old for her 22 years. A face that was all sharp angles and hollow spaces, the result of too many meals skipped to feed a growing pup. She looked exhausted. Haunted. Like someone who'd been running for so long she'd forgotten how to stand still. Someone who feels too much in a world that feels too little. Kale's words echoed in her mind. He'd said it like it was something valuable. Precious. But Mira had spent her entire life being told that feeling too much was her fundamental flaw. That caring about things that didn't matter was what made her defective. That a proper wolf would have walked past that storage shed without a second thought, would have understood that resources shouldn't be wasted on the weak. But she couldn't. Something in her DNA, in her soul, in whatever made her refuse to accept that some lives mattered less. Refuse to believe that strength was the only measure of worth. Was that really so wrong? A soft whine drew her attention. Ash had tired himself out exploring and was now sitting by her feet, looking up at her with those trusting eyes. She scooped him up, feeling his small body relax against her chest. His heartbeat was steady now, strong. Nothing like the thready, desperate pulse she'd felt that first night when she'd wrapped him in her shirt and smuggled him to her room. "We're safe now," she whispered into his fur. He said, "We're safe." But even as she said it, doubt crept in. Was she safe? Or had she just traded one kind of danger for another? Cale Thornridge was powerful beyond measure. A king. A predator. Men like him didn't offer kindness without expecting something in return. What did he want from her? The question haunted her as she explored the adjoining room Vera had mentioned. True to her word, there were supplies, soft blankets, puppy food that smelled better than anything Mira had eaten in years, toys that Ash immediately claimed with enthusiastic tail wags. She set him up with food and water, watching him eat with a kind of desperate focus that came from knowing hunger too well. "Eat slow," she murmured, though she knew he wouldn't listen. "You'll make yourself sick." She should eat too. Should take advantage of whatever food they brought up. But her stomach was twisted in knots, anxiety and confusion making it hard to think about anything as mundane as dinner. Instead, she moved to the bathroom, staring at the tub like it might bite her. When was the last time she'd had a real bath? Not a quick wash with cold water from a bucket, but an actual bath with hot water and soap and time to just be clean? She couldn't remember. Mira turned on the faucet, half expecting it not to work. But water flowed out, clear and pure, and when she adjusted the temperature, it actually got hot. Steam began to rise, fogging the mirror. She stood there for a long moment, watching the tub fill, trying to convince herself this was real. Then, moving quickly before she could talk herself out of it, she stripped off her filthy clothes. Looked at them in a pile on the floor, the worn shirt with holes in the seams, the pants that were more patches than original fabric, the underwear that had been washed so many times it was nearly transparent. These were the clothes of someone who didn't matter. Someone who got the leftovers, the cast-offs, the things no one else wanted. She left them where they fell and stepped into the tub. The heat was almost painful at first, making her skin tingle and her muscles protest. But as she sank down, letting the water cover her up to her chin, something inside her cracked wide open. The warmth seeped into bones that had been cold for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to be truly warm. The steam filled her lungs, clean and pure, and nothing like the stale air of the kennels. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Mira let herself cry. It came out in quiet sobs at first, then harder, until her whole body shook with the force of years of suppressed grief. Grief for the mother she'd lost. For the father who'd abandoned her. For the childhood she'd never had. For every moment of cruelty, every whispered insult, every time she'd made herself small and invisible just to survive. For the girl she'd been, who'd believed she deserved it all. The water mixed with her tears, washing away dirt and blood and the residue of a life spent at the bottom. She scrubbed her skin until it was pink and raw, scrubbed her hair until the water ran clear, scrubbed away every physical mark of Clearwater Pack until there was nothing left but her. Just Mira. Scarred and broken and defective and still, somehow, impossibly, still here. When she finally climbed out, she felt lighter. Emptier. Like she'd purged something toxic that had been poisoning her from the inside. She wrapped herself in one of the impossibly soft towels and looked at her reflection in the now clear mirror. The girl staring back looked different. Cleaner, yes. But also rawer. More vulnerable. Without the dirt and grime and defensive walls, there was nothing to hide behind. Just her face, her eyes, her truth. I didn't claim you to hurt you, Cale had said. I claimed you because you showed me something genuine. What did he see when he looked at her? What had made him smile in that courtyard instead of ordering her death? She'd replayed the moment 1,000 times in her mind, trying to understand. The slap. His stillness. That flash of something in his eyes before he'd claimed her. Recognition, he'd said. Like he'd been searching for something and found it in her. But what? What could someone like her possibly offer someone like him? A knock at the door made her jump. She quickly pulled on a robe she found hanging on the back of the bathroom door, thick and warm and far too nice for someone like her, and went to answer it. Vera stood there with a tray of food that made Myra's stomach clench with sudden, fierce hunger. Figured you might want to eat in your room tonight, the older woman said, her eyes taking in Myra's damp hair and red-rimmed eyes without comment. Tomorrow you can join everyone in the dining hall if you'd like. But tonight you should rest. Thank you, Myra whispered, taking the tray with shaking hands. Vera paused at the door. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone harder. More calculated. The kind of woman who'd slap a king as a power play. Her smile was gentle. But you're just a girl who protected something helpless, aren't you? Myra's throat closed up. She could only nod. Good, Vera said firmly. We need more of that here. More heart. More compassion. More people who act from love instead of ambition. She glanced back down the hallway, then lowered her voice. The king, he's a good man, Myra. Hard, yes. Demanding. But good. Whatever he saw in you today, whatever reason he had for claiming you, trust that it wasn't cruelty. That's not who he is. Then she was gone, leaving Myra alone with food she couldn't taste and thoughts she couldn't quiet. She fed Ash first, watching him devour his portion with puppy enthusiasm. Then she forced herself to eat, mechanically chewing and swallowing even though everything tasted like ash on her tongue. Her body needed fuel. She knew that. But her mind was elsewhere, circling the same questions over and over. Who is she now? Not the invisible Omega from Clearwater. That girl was gone, left behind in a courtyard where she'd done the impossible and survived. But who is she in this new world? In this place where people bowed and called her the claimed one and looked at her like she mattered? She didn't know. Didn't have the first idea how to be anything other than what she'd always been, small, quiet, trying desperately not to take up space. But Cale had said he wanted to show her what he saw in that courtyard. Had said her compassion wasn't a defect, but something precious. Maybe she could try. Try to be someone who deserved that kind of recognition. Try to understand what he saw that she couldn't see in herself. Try to believe that after 22 years of being told she was worthless, maybe, just maybe, she wasn't. Myra moved to the bed, Ash already curled up on one of the pillows like he owned the place. She lay down beside him, her hand resting on his soft fur, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow she'd have to face Cale again, face whatever he wanted from her, face a world she didn't understand. But tonight, for the first time in her entire life, she was clean and warm and safe. And that, somehow, was enough. Morning came with soft light filtering through curtains Myra hadn't remembered to close. She woke slowly, consciousness returning in layers, warmth, softness, the unfamiliar comfort of a real mattress beneath her body. For a moment, disoriented and half-dreaming, she thought she was still in the kennels. Then Ash shifted against her side, letting out a sleepy puppy yawn, and everything came rushing back. The slap. The claim. Thornridge Keep. Her new reality. Myra sat up carefully, not wanting to disturb Ash, and looked around the room. In daylight, it was even more beautiful than she'd realized. The furniture was handcrafted. She could see the care in every joint, every carved detail. The curtains were heavy silk that probably cost more than she'd earned in her entire life. Even the rug beneath the bed was thick and luxurious, the kind of thing that belonged in an alpha's personal quarters, not in a room for acclaimed Omega. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, her voice still rough with sleep. Vera entered carrying another tray, this one laden with breakfast. But she wasn't alone. Behind her came two younger women carrying what looked like clothing, piles and piles of it in various fabrics and colors. "Good morning," Vera said with a warm smile. "The king thought you might need a few things. Clothes, mainly. You can't keep wearing that robe everywhere." Mira looked down at herself, suddenly aware she was still in the borrowed robe from last night, her hair a tangled mess. Heat crept up her neck. "I have clothes." She stopped, remembering the pile of rags she'd left on the bathroom floor. Those weren't clothes. They were evidence of poverty. "Those are being disposed of," Vera said firmly, reading her mind. "These are yours now. Try them on, see what fits. Keep what you like, and we'll adjust the rest." The two younger women laid out the clothes on the bed: soft sweaters, sturdy pants, dresses and fabrics that looked like they'd never seen hard labor, undergarments that were actually new and whole. Mira stared at it all, overwhelmed. "I can't, this is too much." "It's necessity," Vera corrected. "You live here now. You need appropriate clothing." Her expression softened. "I know this is a lot, Mira. Everything's changed very quickly for you. But you're allowed to accept good things. You're allowed to have what you need." The words hit harder than they should have. You're allowed to have what you need. As if needing things was permission she'd never been granted before. Because it wasn't. Not really. After Vera and the other women left, Mira stood in front of the mirror wearing clothes that actually fit. Dark pants that didn't have holes. A soft green sweater that made her eyes look brighter. Boots that were sturdy and new and didn't pinch. She looked different. Not like an Omega who scrubbed kennels. Like someone who mattered. The thought made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't name. Another knock. This time, Kale's voice came through the door. "Mira? Are you decent?" Her heart jumped into her throat. "Yes. Come in." He entered, and the room immediately felt smaller. Kale was dressed simply today: dark pants, a fitted shirt that showed the powerful lines of his shoulders and arms. His hair was pulled back, revealing the sharp angles of his face, those golden eyes that seemed to see straight through her. "You look rested," he observed, then his gaze dropped to Ash, who'd woken up and was watching the Alpha King with wary curiosity. "And the pup looks healthier already." "The food helped," Mira said, her hands twisting together nervously. "Thank you. For everything. The room, the clothes, You don't need to thank me for basic necessities." Kale moved further into the room, his movements controlled and precise. "I told you last night, you're not here as a prisoner. You're here as someone I want to understand." He paused. "Are you ready to begin that process?" Myra's mouth went dry. "Begin how?" "There's something I want to show you. Something that will help you understand why I claimed you. Why you matter." He held out his hand, just as he had yesterday. "Will you trust me?" Every instinct she had screamed caution. This man was powerful, dangerous, unpredictable. She'd known him for less than a day. She shouldn't trust him. But something in his eyes, that same recognition she'd seen in the courtyard, made her reach out and take his hand anyway. "Good," he said softly. "Bring the pup. He should see this too." They drove deeper into the forest, past the main compound and into territory that felt ancient. The trees here were massive, their trunks wider than Mira was tall, their branches creating a canopy so thick that sunlight filtered through in golden beams that looked almost sacred. Kale drove himself this time, no convoy, no guards. Just the two of them and Ash, who'd fallen asleep on Myra's lap within minutes of the car starting. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, Mira couldn't hold them in anymore. "Where are we going?" "To the Temple of First Wolves," Kale said, his eyes on the narrow road ahead. "It's a sacred site. One of the oldest places in our territory. Most wolves never see it, Only alphas and those the alphas bring. Why are you bringing me? Because you need to see what's written there. What's been waiting there for generations? He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. And because I think you'll understand it in a way others haven't. The road ended at a clearing. Kale parked and came around to help her out, his hand warm and steady as she stepped onto ground that felt different somehow. Charged. Like the earth itself was holding its breath. This way, he said, leading her down a path marked by stones that looked older than time itself. The temple revealed itself gradually, first just shapes in the shadows, then clearer lines as they got closer. It wasn't a building, not really. More like a series of standing stones arranged in patterns that made Myra's wolf stir restlessly. Symbols were carved into the stones, worn by weather, but still visible. And at the center, a stone altar that looked like it had been grown from the earth rather than placed there. The first wolves built this, Kale said quietly, his voice reverent. Before packs. Before territories. Before hierarchy. When we were just wolves trying to understand what we were and why we existed. Mira moved closer to one of the standing stones, her fingers tracing the carved symbols. They looked like wolves, but different somehow. More fluid. More complete. What did they say? It's a prophecy. Or a warning. Scholars have debated it for centuries. Kale came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. But the core message is clear. Our strength comes not from dominance, but from balance. Not from crushing the weak, but from protecting them. Not from hierarchy, but from harmony. He pointed to a series of symbols that showed a large wolf standing beside a smaller one. This passage talks about the protector instinct, the ability to sense vulnerability and respond with compassion instead of contempt. It was considered the highest trait a wolf could possess. The mark of true strength. Mira stared at the carvings, something clicking in her mind. But that's not how packs work now. Now it's all about dominance. Power. The strongest wolf wins. Exactly. Kale's voice was hard. Somewhere along the way, we lost this. We decided that compassion was weakness. That protecting the vulnerable was wasteful. That true strength meant crushing anyone who couldn't fight back. He turned to face her fully. And we've been destroying ourselves ever since. I don't understand what this has to do with me. Don't you? His hand came up to cup her cheek, the gesture so unexpected that Mira froze. You slapped a king to protect a pup that wasn't yours. A pup your pack had deemed worthless. You risked everything, your life, your safety, whatever future you had, because something in you couldn't watch something helpless suffer. That's just anyone would have. No. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, and Myra's breath caught. They wouldn't. You saw them all standing there. Your entire pack. My warriors. Other alphas. Everyone watching. And not a single one of them moved to help that pup. Not one. They would have let him live in fear because my authority was more important than his terror. Myra's throat tightened. He was just scared. He didn't understand. And you protected him anyway. Without thinking. Without calculating the cost. Kale's eyes burned into hers. That instinct, Mira, that immediate, unthinking compassion, is what these stones talk about. It's the protector instinct. And it's so rare now that I've been searching 5 territories for years, trying to find someone who still has it. The world seemed to tilt. Mira pulled back from his touch, needing space to think. You're saying I'm, what? Special? Chosen? She shook her head. I'm not. I'm just someone who couldn't walk away from a suffering animal. That's not destiny. That's not prophecy. It's just being who you are, Kale finished. I know. That's what makes it real. He gestured to the altar. Come. There's more you need to see. Reluctantly, Mira followed him to the center of the stone circle. The altar had more carvings, these ones more detailed. Wolves in various poses, hunting, playing, protecting, mourning. And at the very center, a symbol that made her wolf surge forward with sudden, fierce interest. It was a wolf with flames around it. Not consuming it. Protecting it. The flame-blessed, Kale said softly. Another part of the prophecy. It speaks of wolves who carry an inner fire, compassion so strong it becomes a kind of power. They can see suffering others ignore, feel pain others dismiss, and they burn with the need to make things right, even when it costs them everything. Myra's hand went to her chest without thinking. All her life, she'd felt it, that burning sensation when she witnessed cruelty, that flame of rage and grief that consumed her when she saw the vulnerable suffering. She'd thought it was weakness, a flaw, something wrong with her that she couldn't just accept the way things were. The prophecy says the flame-blessed will return when the packs need them most, Kale continued. When we've strayed so far from our true nature that we're on the verge of losing what makes us wolves. They'll appear not as warriors or alphas, but as the overlooked, the dismissed, the ones everyone assumed were weak. You think I'm this flame-blessed? Myra's voice came out strangled. That's insane. I'm nobody. I have no power. I can barely shift properly, my wolf is small and your wolf is exactly what she needs to be. Kale's hand caught hers, pressing her palm flat against the altar. The stone was warm beneath her touch, almost alive. Power isn't always physical strength, Mira. Sometimes the strongest power is the ability to care in a world that's forgotten how. As if responding to his words, the stone beneath her hand pulsed. Just once. A throb of warmth that shot up her arm and straight to her heart. Mira gasped, trying to pull away, but Kale held her firm. Don't fight it. Just feel. The warmth spread through her chest, and suddenly Mira could feel everything. The forest around them, every tree, every creature, every heartbeat. She could feel Ash sleeping in the car, his dreams peaceful and safe for the first time in his short life. Could feel the ancient power of the stones, patient and waiting. Could feel Kale beside her, his presence like a steady flame of its own. And deeper, buried beneath years of pain and rejection and learning to make herself small, she felt her own fire. The thing she'd always tried to suppress. The compassion that felt too big for her body, the empathy that hurt, the desperate need to protect and nurture and fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. It had always been there. Part of her DNA. Part of her soul. Not a flaw. A gift. The sensation faded slowly, leaving Mira gasping and shaking. Kale's arms caught her before she could fall, pulling her against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, grounding her. What was that? She whispered. The temple recognizing you, he said against her hair. Acknowledging what you are. He pulled back just enough to see her face. You felt it, didn't you? Your true nature. The fire you've been taught to suppress. Mira nodded, unable to speak. Tears were streaming down her face, but they weren't sad tears. They were release. Relief. Recognition. All her life, she'd been told there was something wrong with her. That caring too much made her weak. That her instinct to protect the vulnerable was a defect that marked her as useless. But what if it wasn't? What if the thing she'd been taught to hate about herself was actually the thing that made her valuable? I don't know how to be this, she admitted, her voice breaking. I don't know how to be someone who matters. Someone with purpose. You don't have to know right now. Kale's hand cupped her face again, his thumb wiping away her tears. You just have to stop fighting what you are. Stop making yourself small to fit into a world that never deserved you in the first place. And if I can't? If I'm too broken from years of... You're not broken. His voice was fierce, commanding. You're scarred. There's a difference. Scars are proof you survived. Proof you fought. Proof you're still here despite everything that tried to destroy you. Mira looked up at him, this powerful alpha king who'd appended her world with 3 words, and saw something in his eyes that took her breath away. Belief. He believed in her. Believed in what she could be. Believed in the fire she'd spent her whole life trying to extinguish. Why? The word came out barely above a whisper. Why do you care? Why does any of this matter to you? Kale was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. Then he said, because I'm tired of ruling a world that values strength over heart. I'm tired of watching wolves forget what we're supposed to be. I'm tired of pretending that dominance is the same thing as leadership. His jaw tightened. And because when I saw you in that courtyard, protecting a pup everyone else had written off, I saw what I've been searching for. Hope that we haven't completely lost ourselves. Proof that the old ways, the true ways, still exist somewhere. In a broken omega from a backwater pack? In a woman with the protector instinct so strong she didn't even think before putting herself between danger and something helpless. He smiled, and it transformed his face. Yes, Mira. In you. The weight of his words, his belief, his expectations, it should have crushed her. Should have sent her running. But instead, standing in this ancient place with her hand still warm from touching the altar, Mira felt something she'd never experienced before. Possibility. Maybe she wasn't defective. Maybe she wasn't weak. Maybe the fire burning inside her, the compassion that hurt, the empathy that consumed her, the desperate need to protect, wasn't something to suppress. Maybe it was exactly what she was meant to be. I'm scared, she admitted. Terrified, actually. I don't know how to do any of this. How to be what you think I am. Good. Kale's smile widened. Fear means you understand the responsibility. It means you won't take this lightly. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. You don't have to become something new, Mira. You just have to stop hiding what you've always been. As they walked back to the car, Ash waking up and yipping excitedly at their return, Mira felt the ancient stones watching. Waiting. Like they'd been waiting for centuries for someone like her to finally arrive. She didn't know if she believed in prophecies or destinies or flames that blessed instead of burned. But she believed in the warmth still spreading through her chest. Believed in the way Kale looked at her like she was valuable. Believed in the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she'd been wrong about herself all along. And for the first time in her life, that belief felt like the beginning of something powerful. Something that might just change everything. The peace lasted exactly 3 days. 3 days of Mira learning to navigate Thornridge Keep, of watching Ash grow stronger and braver, of quiet conversations with Kale that left her feeling seen in ways she'd never experienced. 3 days of beginning to believe that maybe she could be what he thought she was. Then the council arrived. Mira was in the garden with Ash when she first felt the shift. The air grew heavier, charged with tension that made her wolf pace restlessly. Ash felt it too, pressing against her legs with a nervous whine. She picked him up, holding him close, and turned to find Vera approaching with an expression that sent ice through Myra's veins. The king wants you in the council chamber, Vera said quietly. Now. What's happening? The territorial alphas have called an emergency session. Vera's jaw tightened. They're here to challenge your claim. Myra's stomach dropped. She'd known this was coming, had felt it building in the whispers that followed her through the keep, in the looks she got from warriors who didn't understand why their king had claimed a nobody. But knowing it was coming and facing it were two very different things. I don't belong in a council meeting. I'm not. You're the king's claimed. That gives you the right to be present when you're being discussed. Vera's hand on her shoulder was firm. And trust me, child, you're being discussed. The council chamber was a massive room with a circular table carved from a single piece of ancient oak. 12 seats surrounded it, one for each territorial alpha and one for the king. When Mira entered, still carrying Ash, the conversation died instantly. 12 pairs of eyes turned to her. Some curious, some hostile, all assessing. Kale sat at the head of the table, his expression carved from stone. But when his eyes met hers, something softened. He gestured to a chair that had been placed beside his own. Mira, join us. She moved forward on shaking legs, acutely aware of every eye tracking her movement. The clothes Vera had given her were nice, probably the finest she'd ever worn, but sitting among these alphas in their expensive suits and jewelry, she felt like a child playing dress-up. Is the pup necessary? A woman with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice spoke from across the table. Alpha Corinne of the Northern Reach, Mira remembered from the introductions Kale had given her. The pup stays, Kale said flatly. Continue with what you were saying, Marcus. Alpha Marcus of the Eastern Hills leaned forward, his expression carefully neutral. We were discussing the unusual nature of your recent claim, Your Majesty. While we respect your authority absolutely, the Council has concerns. What concerns? Kale's voice was dangerously soft. She has no rank, another alpha spoke up, Julian of the Western Pass, younger than the others, but with eyes that held cruelty. No family connections. No demonstrated strength or skill. By all accounts, she was a kennel worker in one of our weakest packs. And? Kale's fingers drummed once on the table. I'm failing to see how any of that matters. It matters because claims have meaning, Corinne said sharply. They're supposed to signify value. Worth. When an Alpha King claims someone, it sends a message to all territories about what qualities are valued, what standards we hold. Her gaze slid to Mira, cold and dismissive. What message does this send? Mira felt herself shrinking in the chair, making herself smaller. Old habits. Old survival instincts. She forced herself to stop, to sit up straight even as her heart hammered against her ribs. It sends the message, Kale said, each word deliberate, that I value compassion over rank. Heart over hierarchy. The courage to protect the vulnerable over the cowardice of preying on them. Poetic, Julian said with a thin smile. But impractical. We're wolves, Your Majesty. We survive through strength. Through dominance. Through maintaining clear hierarchies that keep order. He gestured toward Mira without looking at her directly. What strength does she possess? What has she accomplished? Why should any wolf in any territory look at her and see someone worthy of the king's claim? The words hit like physical blows. Myra's hands tightened in Ash's fur, the pup the only thing keeping her grounded. Every insecurity she'd ever had, every voice that had told her she was worthless, seemed to speak through Julian's mouth. She slapped me, Kale said calmly. The table went silent. Excuse me? Marcus looked like he'd misheard. She slapped me. In front of her entire pack. In front of visiting alphas. In front of my warriors. Kale's eyes never left Julian's face. She struck the Alpha King to protect a pup her pack had left to die. She risked execution without a second thought because her instinct to shield something helpless was stronger than her instinct for self-preservation. He leaned forward slightly. Tell me, Julian. When was the last time you risked anything for someone who couldn't benefit you? Julian's face flushed. That has nothing to do with. It has everything to do with it. Kale stood, and the room seemed to shrink around him. You want to know what message her claim sends? It sends the message that I'm done rewarding wolves who mistake cruelty for strength. Done pretending that the ability to dominate others is the same thing as the ability to lead them. Done watching our territories tear themselves apart because we've forgotten what it means to protect instead of just conquer. You're being idealistic, Corinne said, though her voice had lost some of its edge. The real world doesn't work that way. Compassion is a luxury we can't afford. Compassion is the only thing we can't afford to lose. Kale's voice rang through the chamber. And if you can't see that, then you've already lost what makes you a wolf worth following. Another alpha spoke up, Helena of the Southern Ridge, older and with kind eyes that reminded Mira of Vera. Your Majesty, I don't think anyone here questions your judgment or your reasons. But you must understand how this appears to the packs. A claimed wolf with no training, no rank, no demonstrated ability to handle the responsibilities that come with being tied to the crown. Then train her, Kale said simply. Teach her what she needs to know. But don't stand here and tell me that rank and training matter more than character. Don't tell me that a wolf who's been beaten down by a cruel system is worth less than one who is born into privilege. She's a liability, Julian insisted, his composure cracking. She has no understanding of pack politics, no experience with territorial disputes, no knowledge of how to navigate council dynamics. If you bring her into serious negotiations, she could cause disasters through sheer ignorance. Enough. Kale's word cracked like a whip. You're not concerned about her ignorance, Julian. You're concerned that her presence challenges everything you've built your power on. That if compassion becomes valued over dominance, you lose your edge. Julian's eyes flashed. I'm concerned that you're allowing sentiment to cloud your judgment. That you're elevating a nobody to a position she hasn't earned because she did one impulsive thing that happened to appeal to you. Careful. The warning in Kale's voice was unmistakable. You're very close to crossing a line. Am I? Julian stood as well, and several other alphas shifted uncomfortably. Or am I saying what everyone at this table is thinking? That the Alpha King has made a mistake. That he's let his emotions override his duty. That he's put the entire territorial structure at risk for a girl who what? Myra's voice cut through the room, surprising everyone, including herself. All eyes turned to her. She was standing now, though she didn't remember getting up. Ash was still in her arms, but something had shifted inside her. That flame Kale had talked about at the temple, it was burning now, hot and fierce. Finish your sentence, she said, looking directly at Julian. A girl who what? Julian's lip curled. A girl who has no business being in this room. Who doesn't understand the first thing about leadership or responsibility or what it takes to stand beside a king. You're right. The admission seemed to shock him. I don't know anything about pack politics. I've never negotiated a territorial dispute. I've spent my entire life at the bottom of a hierarchy that told me I didn't matter. She took a step forward, and Julian actually stepped back. But I know what it's like to be powerless. I know what it feels like when the strong prey on the weak and call it natural order. I know what it's like to watch something innocent suffer and have everyone around you pretend not to see it. I'm not finished. Her voice was stronger now, the flame in her chest spreading warmth through her limbs. You talk about strength like it's the only thing that matters. Like the ability to dominate and control and crush is what makes a good leader. But I've seen where that leads. I've lived in a pack run by wolves who thought like you. And you know what it created? Cruelty. Fear. A place where the vulnerable were discarded and compassion was punished, and everyone was so busy protecting their own power, they forgot what they were supposed to be protecting in the first place. The room was completely silent now. So yes, Mira continued, her eyes never leaving Julian's, I slapped the Alpha King. I did an impulsive thing. I didn't calculate the politics or consider the optics or think about how it would look. I just acted because something in me couldn't stand by and watch a terrified pup suffer. She felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. And if that makes me unworthy of being claimed, if that makes me a liability, if that means I don't belong in this room, then maybe you're right. Maybe I don't belong here. She turned to Kale, her voice softening. Maybe I don't understand your world. Maybe I never will. But I understand what I felt at that temple. I understand the fire inside me that you say is a gift instead of a flaw. And I understand that if I stay here, if I accept this claim, I can't be what they want me to be. She gestured to the council. I can only be what I am. Someone who feels too much and cares too deeply and can't turn off her compassion even when it's inconvenient. Kale's expression was unreadable, but something blazed in his golden eyes. So I need you to decide, Mira said, her voice barely above a whisper now. Do you want me to change? To become harder, more political, more like them? Because I don't know if I can. I don't know if I want to. She swallowed hard. Or do you want me exactly as I am, broken and scarred and probably going to make mistakes and definitely going to care too much about things that don't seem to matter? The silence stretched so long that Myra's courage began to falter. She'd spoken out of turn. Challenged the council. Probably destroyed whatever fragile acceptance she'd been building. The old familiar shame started creeping in, telling her to apologize, to take it back, to make herself small again. Exactly as you are. Kale's voice was rough, almost reverent. He crossed to her in 3 long strides and took her face in his hands. Every scar, every broken piece, every bit of compassion that's too big for this cruel world. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. That's what I want. That's what this world needs. Then he turned to face the council, one arm sliding around Myra's shoulders, a clear statement of unity. Anyone who has a problem with my claim can challenge me directly. But understand this, Mira stays. Not because I'm being sentimental. Not because I'm confused. But because she represents the future I'm trying to build. A world where compassion is strength. Where protecting the vulnerable is honored. Where wolves remember what we're supposed to be. And if she fails? Corinne asked quietly. If she can't handle the pressure, the politics, the reality of what being tied to the crown means? Then I'll be there to catch her, Kale said simply. Just as I expect you all to be. Because that's what a real pack does, supports each other. Protects the vulnerable. Lifts up those who are struggling. His eyes swept the table. Or have you all forgotten that too? Marcus cleared his throat. Your Majesty, I don't think anyone here truly objects to your claim. We're simply concerned. Change is difficult. The old ways are entrenched. There will be resistance. Let them resist. Kale's voice was hard. Let them challenge. Let them question. Because that conversation, that conflict is exactly what we need. We need to examine what we've become. We need to question whether strength through dominance is really working or if it's slowly destroying us from within. He looked down at Mira and his expression softened. She's not a liability. She's a mirror. And if what you see when you look at her makes you uncomfortable, maybe that's something you need to examine in yourself. The council meeting continued for another hour, but the fight had gone out of it. Alphas asked questions, some genuine, some still skeptical, about how Mira would be integrated into council proceedings, what training she'd receive, what role she'd play in territorial matters. Kale answered each one patiently, making it clear that Myra's position was non-negotiable, but her path forward was still being determined. That she'd be given time to learn, support to grow, and protection while she found her footing. But underneath all the political discussion, Mira could feel the shift. She'd spoken up. She'd defended herself. She'd shown them fire instead of submission. And some of them, not all, but some had looked at her differently after that. When the meeting finally ended and the alphas filed out, Mira sank back into her chair, adrenaline draining away and leaving her shaky and exhausted. Ash, who'd been remarkably quiet through the whole ordeal, licked her chin in sympathy. Kale knelt in front of her chair, his hands covering hers. You were magnificent. I was terrified, she admitted. I probably said too much. I definitely overstepped. You spoke truth. Raw and honest and exactly what they needed to hear. His smile was proud. That fire I saw at the temple? The council just felt its heat. Julian hates me now. Julian feared you before. Now he knows that fear was justified. Kale squeezed her hands. You challenged everything he believes in. Showed him that strength doesn't always look like dominance. That took courage. Mira shook her head. It wasn't courage. I couldn't stay quiet. Couldn't let him define me like that without fighting back. That's exactly what courage is. Acting despite fear. Speaking up when it's easier to stay silent. He stood, pulling her up with him. Come on. You've earned some peace after that. But as they left the council chamber, Mira couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. She'd made her stand, yes. She'd shown them she wouldn't be dismissed easily. But she'd also made enemies. Powerful ones. Wolves who saw her as a threat to their way of life. The world had fought back today. And Mira had a sinking feeling it was only going to fight harder. That night, Kale found Mira on the balcony outside her room. She was curled up in one of the chairs, wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the forest bathed in moonlight. Ash slept peacefully in her lap, finally settled after the chaos of the day. She didn't turn when she heard the door open, but her shoulders tensed slightly. I thought you might be out here, Kale said softly, crossing to lean against the balcony railing. You always seem to seek out quiet spaces after difficult moments. I need to think, Mira said, her voice barely above a whisper. Process everything that happened today. Regrets? She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers absently stroking Ash's fur. I don't know. I stood up for myself in there. Said things I've never had the courage to say before. But I also saw their faces, Kale. Most of them think I'm a mistake. A weakness you can't afford. Most of them are afraid of change. He moved to sit in the chair beside hers, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Julian especially. His entire power base is built on the idea that strength equals dominance. You threaten that worldview simply by existing. I'm just one person. How can I threaten anything? Because you're proof that there's another way. Kale's gaze was fixed on the moon, his profile sharp in the silver light. You protected Ash not because he could offer you anything in return, but because it was the right thing to do. That kind of purity, that kind of genuine compassion, it's dangerous to wolves who've spent their lives justifying cruelty as necessity. Mira pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Tell me something. And be honest. Always. Do you ever wonder if you made a mistake? If claiming me was an impulse you're going to regret? Kale turned to look at her then, and the intensity in his golden eyes made her breath catch. Never. Not once. Not even when Julian was at his worst today. He reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on Ash's back. But I do worry that I've pulled you into a world that will try to break you. That will demand you become something you're not just to survive. I'm already broken, Mira said with a bitter laugh. What more can they do? You're not broken. His voice was fierce. And I need you to stop saying that. Stop believing it. He shifted his chair closer, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. Tell me about your scars, Mira. The ones I can't see. The ones that make you think you're less than whole. She wanted to pull away, to deflect, to change the subject. But something in his expression, openness, vulnerability, genuine interest, made her throat tighten with unshed tears. I don't remember my mother, she said finally. Just fragments. The smell of her hair. The sound of her laugh. The way she used to hum when she cooked. Her voice cracked. She died, bringing me into the world. And my father, he looked at me once after she was gone. Just once. And I saw it in his eyes that I wasn't worth what he'd lost. That I was the wrong choice. The wrong outcome. Kale's hand tightened on hers, but he didn't speak, letting her continue. He left 3 days later. Just walked away from the pack and never came back. And I became the girl whose mother died and whose father couldn't bear to stay. The cursed one. The unwanted one. Myra's fingers trembled in Ash's fur. I learned to make myself invisible. To take up as little space as possible. To be grateful for scraps because scraps were more than I deserved. Mira, let me finish. She needed to get this out, needed him to understand what he'd claimed. I spent 17 years believing I was a burden. That my existence was something others had to tolerate, not celebrate. And then when I found Ash, when I felt that pull to protect him. She looked down at the sleeping pup. It was the first time in my life I felt like I had a purpose. Like maybe I existed for a reason. You do exist for a reason. Kale's voice was rough. More than you know. Do I? She finally met his eyes. Or am I just a symbol? A representation of something you want to build? Because if that's all I am, if I'm just a tool to make a point about compassion and change, then I need to know now. The hurt that flashed across Kale's face was so raw it made Myra's chest ache. Is that really what you think? He stood abruptly, pacing to the railing. That you're just some political statement to me? I don't know what to think. Myra's voice broke. You're an alpha king. You could have anyone. You could claim powerful wolves, beautiful wolves, wolves who actually understand your world and could help you rule. But you chose me, a nobody from a nobody pack who can barely function in council meetings without having a panic attack. She stood too, still clutching Ash. So yes, sometimes I wonder if this is real or if I'm just convenient. A living example of your philosophy. Kale turned to face her, and the look in his eyes, pain and frustration, and something deeper, something that made her wolf surge forward with recognition, stole her breath. You want to know the truth? He crossed to her in 2 strides, stopping so close she had to tilt her head back to see his face. The real reason I claimed you? Yes. Because when I saw you in that courtyard, slapping me to protect a pup everyone else had dismissed, I felt something I haven't felt in years. His hand came up to cup her face, and Myra's pulse jumped. Hope. Real, genuine hope that maybe I wasn't alone in this fight. That maybe there was someone else who still believed compassion mattered. Who still felt deeply in a world that's learned to feel nothing. Kale. I'm tired, Mira. The confession seemed torn from somewhere deep inside him. Tired of being surrounded by wolves who see every interaction as a transaction. Who calculate the value of lives based on rank and power. Who've forgotten that we're supposed to protect our packs, not just rule them. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, and she realized she was crying. And then you appeared. This fierce, terrified woman who risked death without thinking because your heart wouldn't let you do anything else. And I thought, maybe there's still hope. I'm not fierce, Mira whispered. I'm scared all the time. I don't know what I'm doing. I barely survived today without falling apart completely. You stood in front of the council and told them they were wrong. You challenged Julian when he tried to diminish you. You spoke truth when it would have been easier to stay quiet. Kale's other hand came up to frame her face. That's not weakness, Mira. That's the kind of strength that actually matters. They stood there, inches apart, the moonlight casting shadows across Kale's face. Mira could feel the warmth of him, smell cedar and smoke, and something uniquely him. Her wolf was practically vibrating with awareness, with want, with something that felt like recognition. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. How to be what you need. What the territories need. Then learn. We'll figure it out together. His voice dropped lower, intimate, and intense. But don't ever think you're just a symbol to me. Don't ever believe you're convenient or replaceable or anything less than exactly what I've been searching for. And what's that? Someone real. He leaned his forehead against hers, the gesture so tender it made her ache. Someone who makes me remember why I fight. Why I refuse to let this world become nothing but hierarchy and dominance and wolves who've forgotten how to care. Myra's breath hitched. I'm going to disappoint you. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to be human. Be imperfect. Be exactly who you are. Kale pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. That's all I ask. That you don't try to become what you think I want. That you stay true to that fire inside you, even when the world tries to extinguish it. That's a lot to ask. I know. His smile was soft, almost sad. But I think you're strong enough to do it. Stronger than you know. They stayed like that, close enough to kiss, the tension between them electric and terrifying and wonderful all at once. Mira wanted to close the distance, wanted to feel his lips on hers, wanted to stop thinking and just feel for once. But fear held her back. Fear that if she let herself want this, want him, the inevitable loss would destroy her. I should go, Kale said finally, though he didn't move. Let you rest. Today was a lot. Stay. The word left her mouth before she could stop it. Just for a little while. I don't want to be alone. Something shifted in his expression, surprise, pleasure, something tender that made her chest tight. All right. For a little while. They settled back in the chairs, closer now, their hands intertwined between them. And as the moon traced its path across the sky and Ash slept peacefully in Myra's lap, they talked. About Kale's vision for the territories. About Myra's fears and hopes. About the weight of expectations and the courage it took to challenge them. About loneliness and connection and what it meant to truly be seen. And somewhere in those quiet hours, Mira felt something in her chest, that carefully guarded wall she'd built around her heart, begin to crack. Not breaking, just opening. Just enough to let in the possibility that maybe this was real. That maybe she mattered. That maybe, despite everything, she'd found exactly where she belonged. The attack came at dawn, 3 days later. Mira woke to the sound of Ash's frantic barking and the acrid smell of smoke. She bolted upright, her heart already racing, instinct screaming danger before her mind fully registered what was happening. Fire. The West Wing was burning. She grabbed Ash and ran into the hallway, joining the stream of people evacuating. Smoke filled the corridors, thick and choking. Warriors shouted orders, directing everyone toward the safe exits. Through the chaos, Mira searched desperately for Kale. This way. Vera appeared beside her, grabbing her arm. The king wants you in the safe room. An explosion rocked the building. Mira stumbled, would have fallen if Vera hadn't caught her. Ash yelped in her arms, terrified. Through the smoke and confusion, Mira saw flames licking up the walls, spreading faster than should be possible. This wasn't an accident. This was an attack. They made it to the courtyard, where wolves were gathering in organized groups. Mira scanned the crowd frantically until she spotted Kale directing the rescue efforts, his face grim and covered in soot. Relief flooded through her. But it was short-lived. Seize her. The voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Mira spun to find Julian standing with a group of warriors, not Kale's warriors, she realized with growing horror. These wore the insignia of the Eastern Hills. Julian's pack. What are you? Myra's words cut off as rough hands grabbed her arms, yanking her backwards. Ash tumbled from her grasp, and she screamed for him, struggling against the hold. Let her go. Vera's command was ignored. More warriors surrounded them, creating a barrier between Mira and the rest of the courtyard. Kale. Myra's scream finally drew his attention. He turned, and the fury that crossed his face when he saw her restrained was terrifying. He moved like lightning, crossing the courtyard in seconds. But Julian stepped into his path, backed by at least 20 warriors. Stand down, Your Majesty, Julian said, his voice carrying false regret. This is council business now. The council has no authority to seize my claimed. The council has every authority when that claimed wolf is discovered to be a threat. Julian pulled out a folder, his expression triumphant. We found these in her quarters during the evacuation. Letters. Correspondence with Clearwater Pack. Plans to undermine your authority. Evidence of conspiracy. Myra's blood ran cold. That's a lie. I never. The evidence speaks for itself. Julian opened the folder, showing pages covered in handwriting that looked disturbingly similar to hers. You've been feeding information to your former pack, helping them prepare resistance against the king's new policies, using your position to sabotage from within. No. Mira struggled harder against the hands holding her. Kale, I swear, I never wrote those. Of course she denies it. Corinne stepped forward from the crowd, her expression cold. They always do when they're caught. Kale's eyes blazed with fury. This is a setup. Obviously fabricated. Is it? Marcus joined the circle and Myra's heart sank. If Marcus was involved, this was bigger than just Julian. Your Majesty, we understand you have feelings for this girl. But you must look at this objectively. She appeared from nowhere. You claimed her impulsively. And now, conveniently, we're under attack and evidence of betrayal is found in her possession. The fire was arson, Kale growled. Someone orchestrated this. Yes, Julian agreed. Someone did. Someone who wanted to create chaos. Someone who had access to the keep's security. Someone who could move freely without suspicion. His gaze slid to Mira. Someone like a claimed wolf that everyone was too busy protecting to properly vet. Mira felt the world tilting. This couldn't be happening. She'd done nothing wrong. Those letters weren't hers. She'd never betray Kale, never conspire against him. But looking at the faces around her, suspicious, convinced, already condemning, she realized the truth didn't matter. Not when the lie was this perfectly constructed. Search her room, Kale ordered, his voice deadly. Verify those letters. Check the handwriting. We already did, Your Majesty. Helena stepped forward, and the sympathy in her eyes made Mira want to scream. I'm sorry, but the handwriting matches. And we found more evidence. Maps of the keep. Notes about your security protocols. Communication devices hidden in her belongings. Planted, Mira gasped. All of it. Please, you have to believe me. Why should we? Julian's voice was soft, poisonous. You admitted yourself you don't belong here. That you don't understand this world. Maybe that's because you were never meant to join it, only destroy it from within. Kale. Mira locked eyes with him across the distance separating them, desperate. Please. You know me. You know I would never. But the look on his face stopped her cold. Not anger. Not even betrayal. Something worse. Doubt. Just for a second. Just a flicker. But it was there, and Mira felt something in her chest shatter. Your Majesty, Marcus said carefully, we're not asking you to condemn her. Just to allow a proper investigation. Let us question her, verify the evidence, determine the truth. If she's innocent, that will be proven. And if the investigation shows guilt? Kale's voice was hollow. Then council law is clear. Conspiracy against the crown is treason. And treason carries only one sentence. Death. Mira couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. This was happening too fast, spinning out of control, and she was powerless to stop it. Just like always. Just like her entire life, helpless while others decided her fate. No. Vera stepped forward, her voice firm. This is wrong. Anyone can see it's a setup. Are you questioning the council's authority? Curran's tone was sharp. Or perhaps you're part of this conspiracy as well? Vera fell silent, but her eyes burned with fury. Kale stood frozen, torn between what he knew and what he was being shown. Mira could see it on his face, the war between his heart and his duty, between what he felt and what the evidence suggested, between the woman he'd claimed and the kingdom he had to protect. And in that moment, Mira understood. No matter what he felt for her, no matter what connection they'd built, Kale was still a king. And kings couldn't afford to choose personal feelings over the safety of thousands. Take her to holding, Kale said finally, the words seeming to cost him everything. No one touches her until I've reviewed the evidence myself. Your Majesty, Julian started. I said no one touches her. The command in Kale's voice was absolute. She gets a fair investigation. Full due process. And if anyone attempts to circumvent that, they answer to me personally. His eyes swept the council members, promising violence. Am I clear? Reluctant nods all around. As the warriors began dragging Mira away, she saw Vera scoop up Ash, protecting the pup. Saw Kale standing rigid in the courtyard, his hands clenched into fists, his face a mask of control barely containing fury. And she saw Julian smile, small, satisfied, victorious. He'd won. They'd won. They'd taken the thing Kale valued and turned it into a weapon against him. Proved that compassion was weakness. That opening your heart meant giving your enemies ammunition. Mira was thrown into a cell deep beneath the keep. Stone walls, iron bars, no windows. The door clanged shut, echoing like a death knell. She sank to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, and finally let herself break. Great, shaking sobs that tore from somewhere deep in her soul. Because she'd been right all along. She didn't belong in this world. Didn't have the strength to survive it. She was just a broken Omega who'd fooled herself into thinking she could be something more. And the worst part, the part that hurt more than the false accusations or the cell or the threat of execution, was that moment of doubt she'd seen in Kale's eyes. He'd hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough to prove what she'd always known. She was alone. She'd always been alone. And no amount of fire in her chest could change that. 3 days in that cell felt like 3 lifetimes. Mira had nothing but stone walls and her own thoughts that spiraled darker with each passing hour. No one came except a silent guard who pushed food through a slot in the door. No word from Kale. No explanation. No trial. Just silence and the growing certainty that she'd been abandoned. On the 3rd night, something changed. Mira woke to the sound of her cell door opening. She scrambled to her feet, heart pounding, expecting guards. Expecting the worst. Instead, Vera slipped inside, her face grim. In her arms was Ash, who immediately began whimpering and straining toward Mira. "We don't have much time," Vera whispered urgently, passing the pup over. Mira clutched him to her chest, breathing in his familiar scent, feeling her first moment of comfort in days. "There's going to be an emergency council session at dawn." Julian's pushed for an expedited trial. He has enough votes to force execution. Myra's stomach dropped. Kale is fighting it. Has been fighting it for 3 days. But Julian's convinced half the council that keeping you alive is too dangerous. That even the investigation proves guilt. Vera's jaw tightened. "The evidence is too perfect, Mira. Too complete. Which means someone planned this for a very long time. I didn't do it. I swear." "I know." Vera gripped her shoulders. "And deep down, so does the king. But he's trapped. If he refuses the council's judgment, it looks like he's putting personal feelings above the safety of the territories." Julian's positioned this perfectly: either Kale lets you die, or he loses the council's trust completely. Mira felt tears burning her eyes. "Then it's over. I'm going to die for something I didn't do, and there's nothing." "No." Vera's voice was fierce. "There's one thing. One chance. But it's dangerous, and I don't know if you're strong enough yet." "What?" "The temple." Vera pulled out a small vial from her pocket, the liquid inside glowing faintly silver. "This is moonwater. Blessed at the temple of first wolves. If you drink it, if you go there tonight, you can invoke the trial of truth." "I don't know what that means." "It's ancient law. Older than the council. Older than territorial boundaries. Any wolf accused of crimes against their own kind can appeal directly to the ancestors. To the original wolves." Vera pressed the vial into Myra's hand. "You drink this, you go to the temple, and you offer yourself for judgment. If you're innocent, the ancestors will prove it. If you're guilty, I die anyway." "Yes, but at least it's on your terms. At least you fight back." Vera's eyes were urgent. "And Mira, if you're truly innocent, if that fire inside you is real, the ancestors will see it. They'll show everyone the truth." Mira stared at the vial. This was insane. Appealing to ancient wolf spirits, trusting in prophecies and magic when she'd barely survived 3 days in a cell. Every rational part of her screamed that this was foolish. But she thought about Kale's face in the courtyard. The doubt. The pain. The impossible position she'd put him in just by existing. And she thought about Julian's smile. About a world where cruelty won because compassion was too easy to weaponize. "How do I get there?" she asked quietly. "The keep is locked down. Guards everywhere. There's a passage. One the king showed me years ago in case of emergency." Vera moved to the corner of the cell, pressing a stone that looked like all the others. A section of wall shifted, revealing darkness beyond. "It leads to the forest. From there, you know the way to the temple. You were there with the king." Mira clutched Ash tighter. "If I do this, if I invoke this trial, what happens to you?" "They'll know you helped me. Let me worry about that." Vera's smile was sad. "I've served this keep for 23 years, Mira. I've watched good wolves be destroyed by politics and seen compassion punished as weakness. I'm tired of standing by." She touched Myra's cheek gently. "And I believe in you. In what you represent. In the change you could bring if given the chance. I'm terrified." "Good. Fear means you understand what you're risking." Vera pushed her toward the passage. "Now go. Dawn comes soon. You need to reach the temple before the council convenes." Mira hesitated at the threshold, looking back at the woman who'd shown her more kindness in days than she'd received in years. "Thank you. For everything. For believing." "Go," Vera said firmly. "And remember what the king told you. You're not broken. You're exactly what this world needs." Then Mira was running through darkness, Ash in one arm and the vial clutched in her other hand, following a tunnel that seemed to go on forever. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Her legs burned. But she didn't stop. She emerged in the forest just as false dawn began lightening the sky. The trees were shrouded in mist, creating an otherworldly atmosphere that made her skin prickle. She uncorked the vial and drank the moon water in one swallow. It tasted like starlight and stone, cold and bright and ancient. Power flooded through her veins, making her gasp. Her wolf surged forward, stronger than she'd ever felt, and suddenly Mira knew the way. Could feel the temple calling to her like a beacon. She ran. Branches tore at her clothes. Roots tried to trip her. But she pushed forward, driven by desperation and something deeper. That fire in her chest was burning hotter now, fed by the moon water, spreading through every part of her. The temple appeared through the mist like a dream. The standing stones glowed faintly in the pre-dawn light, pulsing with energy that made Myra's wolf howl in recognition. She stumbled into the center, falling to her knees at the altar, ash pressed against her side. "I invoke the trial of truth," she gasped, her voice raw. "I'm innocent. I never betrayed the king. I never conspired against the territories. And I demand the ancestors prove it." For a moment, nothing happened. Just silence and mist and Myra's ragged breathing. Then the stones began to glow brighter. Silver light poured from the carvings, illuminating symbols that seemed to writhe and move. The air grew thick, charged with power so intense it made Myra's teeth ache. A presence filled the temple. Not physical. Something older. Vast. The consciousness of wolves long dead but never truly gone. Child of flame, a voice spoke, not in words, but directly into her mind. "You who carry the old fire. You who feel when others have forgotten how. Show us your truth." The world exploded into light. Mira screamed as every memory, every feeling, every moment of her life ripped out of her and displayed in the air like scenes in a play. The ancestors weren't asking, they were taking, examining, judging every piece of her soul. They saw her mother's death, her father's abandonment, years of cruelty and rejection and learning to make herself invisible. They saw her finding Ash, that first moment of pure compassion that had changed everything. They saw her slapping Kale, protecting the pup without thought for consequences. And they saw the truth about the fire, about the planted evidence, about Julian and Corinne and Marcus conspiring together, threatened by change, determined to eliminate the compassion Mira represented before it could take root. The vision shifted, showing what she hadn't seen. Julian's warriors setting the fires. Corinne forging the letters in Myra's handwriting after months of collecting samples. Marcus planting the evidence while everyone evacuated. A carefully orchestrated attack designed not to kill Kale, but to turn him against the one thing that made him vulnerable. His heart. The light grew blinding. Mira felt herself lifted, suspended in power so ancient it made her feel insignificant and infinite all at once. The fire in her chest exploded outward, silver flames erupting from her skin without burning. "You are innocent," the voice declared. "You are pure of heart. You are what we hoped would return when the packs lost their way." Then Mira was falling, crashing back into her body with force that knocked the air from her lungs. She collapsed at the altar, gasping, every nerve ending on fire. But she was alive. And the temple was no longer empty. Figures made of light stood among the stones, the spirits of ancient wolves, the first ones, made visible by the trial. They turned as one toward the forest, where the sound of approaching footsteps announced arrivals. Kale burst into the clearing first, his face haggard, desperate. Behind him came the council members, summoned by whatever power the temple had released. Julian's expression shifted from confident to horrified as he saw the glowing figures, as he realized what Mira had done. "She invoked the trial," Helena breathed, her eyes wide. "The ancestors are here." The spirits turned their glowing eyes on Julian, on Corinne, on Marcus. And without words, everyone present suddenly knew. The truth flooded through the clearing like the moon water had flooded through Mira, undeniable, absolute, damning. "No," Julian stumbled backward. "That's not we were protecting. You conspired against innocence, The voice filled everyone's mind. You weaponized compassion. You sought to destroy the very qualities that might save your kind. They tried to kill me, Mira said, her voice stronger now, amplified by the power still coursing through her. She stood, and silver light clung to her skin like armor. Not because I was guilty. Because I represented change they feared. Because I made them question whether strength through cruelty was the only way. Kale stared at her, and in his eyes she saw not doubt but awe. And anguish at having doubted it all. The evidence was planted, Mira continued, addressing the whole council. The fire was arson designed to create chaos. All of it orchestrated to turn the king against me. To prove that compassion is weakness that can be exploited. She looked at Julian, at his pale, terrified face. You wanted to show that opening your heart gives your enemies power. That caring is dangerous. And in doing so, the ancestral voice said, you proved the opposite. That fear of compassion is the true weakness. That those who fight against kindness are the real threat. The spirits began to fade, their judgment delivered. But before they vanished completely, one of them approached Mira, placed a glowing hand over her heart. The flame is yours to carry, child. Use it well. This world needs its warmth. Then they were gone, leaving only the stone circle and dawn breaking over the forest. Mira swayed, exhausted. Before she could fall, Kale was there, catching her, pulling her against his chest. She felt his heart racing, felt his hands shaking as they held her. I'm sorry, he whispered brokenly. Gods, Mira, I'm so sorry. I should have known. You're a king, she said softly. You had to consider all possibilities. I understand. No. He pulled back to look at her face, and there were tears in his golden eyes. I should have trusted my heart. Should have known you were incapable of that kind of betrayal. His hand cupped her face. Can you forgive me? There's nothing to forgive. Mira leaned into his touch. You gave me the chance to prove my innocence. That's all I could ask. Behind them, warriors were restraining Julian, Corinne, and Marcus. The three who'd conspired faced not just Kale's judgment, but the judgment of ancestors and council combined. Their fate was sealed. But Mira didn't care about their punishment. She was alive, free, vindicated. And the fire in her chest, the compassion she'd been taught was weakness, had been proven by the oldest wolves to be the greatest strength of all. The sun broke fully over the horizon, bathing the temple in golden light. Mira stood at the altar, wrapped in Kale's arms, ash curled at their feet. The council members watched in silence, witnessing something none of them had expected. The coronation of a new kind of strength. What happens now? Mira asked quietly. Now, Kale said, brushing her hair back from her face, we rebuild. We take what you've shown us, what the ancestors confirmed, and we use it to transform the territories. To prove that compassion and strength aren't opposites. That protecting the vulnerable is the highest calling a wolf can have. They'll resist. Mira looked at the remaining alphas. Some faces showed acceptance. Others still held skepticism. Change is terrifying. Let them be terrified. Kale's voice was firm. You stood in front of ancient powers and demanded truth. You survived a conspiracy designed to destroy you. You proved that fire inside you isn't just real, it's sacred. He turned her to face the council. Anyone who can't accept that, anyone who still believes cruelty is the only strength, is welcome to challenge me directly. Silence greeted his words. Helena was the first to step forward. She bowed deeply to Mira, the gesture shocking in its reverence. Forgive me for doubting. The ancestors have spoken. You are flame-blessed. And I will support you and the king in whatever changes you bring. Others followed, not all, but enough. One by one, alphas who'd been ready to condemn her hours ago now bent the knee, accepting what the trial had proven. Only a few remained standing. A few who still clung to old ways, old beliefs. But even they didn't argue, didn't challenge. The ancestors had passed judgment. To fight it would be to fight the very foundation of what they were. This won't be easy, Kale said to Mira as they walked back toward the keep, his hand never leaving hers. There will be more challenges. More wolves who fear what you represent. But we'll face them together. Together, Mira echoed, and the word felt like a promise. As they emerged from the forest, the keep came into view, damaged by fire but still standing. Like her, Mira thought. Scarred but not broken. Changed but not destroyed. Vera was waiting at the entrance, relief flooding her face when she saw them. She opened her arms and Mira walked into them, letting herself be held by the woman who'd risked everything to give her a chance. You did it, Vera whispered. You magnificent, brave girl. You did it. We did it, Mira corrected. I would have died in that cell if you hadn't. Hush. Vera pulled back, her eyes shining. You would have found another way. Fire like yours doesn't extinguish easily. Over the next weeks, change came slowly to the territories. Kale issued new laws protecting the vulnerable. Established systems to ensure no wolf was deemed worthless based on rank or strength alone. Created councils where compassion was valued alongside power. And Mira stood beside him through all of it. Not as decoration. Not as a symbol. But as someone whose voice mattered. Whose perspective shifted how alphas thought about leadership. She was still learning. Still making mistakes. Still terrified sometimes by the responsibility she carried. But she was no longer invisible. No longer broken. No longer the girl who believed she had to shrink herself to survive. She was flame-blessed. Ancestor-approved. Proof that the old ways, the true ways, still existed in a world that had forgotten them. One evening, months after the trial, Mira found herself back at the temple. Kale had brought her there, along with Ash, who'd grown into a strong, healthy young wolf, his coat gleaming and his eyes bright with confidence. I have something for you, Kale said, pulling out a small box. Myra's heart jumped. Kale, I know we're already bound by the claim, but I want more than that. He opened the box, revealing a ring simple, elegant, set with a stone that glowed like captured moonlight. I want you as my mate. My equal. Not because prophecy or ancestors say you should be, but because I choose you. Every day. Every moment. I choose you. Tears streamed down Myra's face. I choose you too. Despite the fear and the danger and the impossibility of it all, I choose you. He slipped the ring on her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that felt like coming home. Like finding safety. Like discovering that strength and gentleness could exist in the same space, the same heart, the same love. When they finally pulled apart, Ash was howling happily, running circles around them. Mira laughed, the sound pure and unburdened, and realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that. We're going to change the world, Kale said, his forehead resting against hers. We already have, Mira replied. And as they stood there, surrounded by ancient stones and new possibilities, Mira understood something profound. She'd spent her whole life believing she was cursed. That her compassion was a flaw. That feeling too much in a cruel world made her defective. But the truth was simpler and more powerful than she'd ever imagined. The world wasn't too cruel for her compassion. Her compassion was exactly what the cruel world needed. And she would spend the rest of her life proving it. Would you have chosen her? In that courtyard, when she slapped a king to protect a helpless pup, would you have seen weakness, or the rarest kind of courage? Would you have looked at a girl with nothing, no rank, no power, no reason to matter, and recognized that she carried something more valuable than strength? Or would you have been like the others, dismissing her compassion as foolish, her empathy as dangerous, her fire as something that needed to be extinguished? The ancestors saw her truth. The temple blessed her flame. But the real question is, do you? Because wolves like Mira, wolves who feel deeply, who protect fiercely, who refuse to let cruelty become normal, they're rare. They're precious. They're the ones who remember what we were meant to be before we forgot that strength comes in many forms. And they're the ones who will save us if we're brave enough to believe in them. If this story touched something inside you, if you felt Myra's pain, celebrated her vindication, believed in her fire, then you understand. You're part of the change. Part of the pack that values heart as much as power. Subscribe to Cindy's Wolfheart Stories. Because here, we don't just tell tales about alphas and omegas. We tell stories about the wolves who dare to feel in a world that's forgotten how. About the fire that burns not to destroy, but to illuminate. About compassion powerful enough to change destinies. This is where broken becomes beautiful. Where weakness transforms into the true